Right, salt and pepper. I hope that's an intriguing title. Um, this is another foundational idea to anything that comes on further in this course series. Why salt and pepper? Um, the metaphor, remember the last lesson was about metaphor. So this is not about salt and pepper. Salt and pepper is just a metaphor. It's an incomplete and inaccurate description of a concept. And the concept I'm trying to describe using the metaphor of salt and pepper is that you can only get out of something that is already present in it. If you remember when I said in the previous video about metaphor that the only accurate representation of a thing is the thing itself, and I used a biro. Well, in order to get ink out of a biro, there must be ink in the biro. And that's what our salt and pepper metaphor is about. If I pick up a cruet, you may or may not be familiar with the word cruet. I'm a bit older and we used words like cruet. That's what certainly my granny did. It's part of the salt and pepper set that may sit nicely in the middle of the table, whether it's at home or a restaurant. So whether you're familiar with that word or not, when I say cruets, I mean the salt and pepper containers that are in the middle. And they're often very similar. There might be some slight differences between them in the number of holes or some other description or an S or a P on them so that you can tell the difference, but you get the general idea. Now, here's a really, really difficult question. Have you ever in your life picked up a salt cellar and shaken some salt out of it? You have? Amazing. Well done. What about pepper? Have you ever picked up a pepper shaker and shaken pepper out of it? Ah, you have. Well done, you. Gosh, I feel that you've passed this course already. That's great. So think about it. You picked up the salt cellar and you shook it and you got salt out of it. Why were you able to get salt out of the salt cellar? Is it because it is called a salt cellar? Now remember what we said about metaphor and verbal descriptions and everything else. It's just a mental construct, salt cellar. It's a label that tells you that this thing is habitually used to put salt in it, and lo and behold, this time it did. But to get salt out of it, there had to be salt in it, and somebody had to put the salt in there. That salt cellar was made in a factory, nowadays probably in China, and it wasn't made with salt in it, probably. It was just a piece of china or a piece of wood or a piece of glass and metal or a piece of plastic. And the idea behind it was that it could be used to put salt in it, or it could be used to put pepper in it, okay? But it didn't come with salt and pepper in it unless it's one of these pre-filled ones. But even then, somebody made the container and then somebody filled it with salt or pepper. Somebody filled the container with the contents. The container is the container and the contents are the contents, okay? So you picked up a salt cellar and you shook salt out of it because somebody had put salt in that container, and you reached for that thing because you felt it was likely to succeed in you putting salt on your chips by reaching for that thing, which in your mind was a salt cellar and was very likely to yield the result you wanted, i.e. salt on your chips, and it worked. And the same for the pepper container. You wanted to put pepper on your tomato, yeah? I put pepper on my tomato, so you're stuck with this metaphor. That's a gory image, tough. So you reach for the thing that you think is very likely to satisfy your want for pepper on your tomato, weirdo. And you shake it and lo and behold, you get pepper out. Same principle. Why was there pepper in that pepper shaker? Because somebody put pepper in it. Now, hopefully these were deliberate acts. Hopefully somebody thought, we should put some salt in this thing, and they put salt in it deliberately, knowing what they were doing, and there was a benign outcome of it. They put salt in it because they thought somebody will want salt, and this is a good act, it's helpful. And the same thing with the pepper. Now somebody could, of course, not had their eye on the ball and lifted the pepper container and put salt in it. And it could have been accident. That could have been through lack of awareness. They could have been distracted and doing the thing without thinking what they were doing. Similarly, somebody might have had the intention to go, you bastard, I'll get you. Ha! And they might have deliberately put pepper in the salt container. They might have been standing with glee, waiting for some poor sod to think, salt on the chips, yummy. And they tipped pepper all over it and ruined the blessed lot. And they're standing in the background going, gotcha. And you're feeling really miserable. Okay? So either it was a deliberate, conscious act, an act of service that put salt in the salt cellar, ready for people to use, or it was an accidental or unconscious act, or it was an evil act, an act done with malice aforethought. Okay, but in those other cases, they're then probably not salt in the salt cellar, they're probably pepper in the salt cellar. This is a metaphor. Remember, not everything is pepper in a salt cellar, but it's a metaphor of describing things that aren't as you think they should be. And in this case, we've gone on from them not being like you think they should be, not because of a description, not because of the metaphor, but in this case, either through an unconscious act or a malicious act. But you get the idea. I'm really trying to hammer home the idea that you cannot get out of a thing that which is not already in it. I'm going to labour the point some more because that's who I am. I like labouring points because I find my learning style is the more different ways I hear the same point, the more concrete the idea comes into my head. So here goes with another metaphor. Imagine you have in front of me, that would be nice because I was going to say a yummy chocolate cake. Please feel free to put a yummy chocolate cake in front of me at any time you like. Okay, I'll even send you the address. You can pay the postage and make the cake, but you get the idea. Imagine that in front of you is a yummy chocolate cake, assuming, of course, that you are a normal person and think the chocolate cake is yummy. If you are a weirdo freak that doesn't like chocolate cake, get out of this video now. I'm not interested in training you. There's something wrong with you. So anyway, we have this chocolate cake sitting there. What's likely to have gone into a chocolate cake that I know you can't extract the ingredients from a chocolate cake, but what's like, maybe sugar and eggs and flour, and of course, let's see, oh yeah, chocolate, maybe butter icing. Oh, I do like butter icing. Maybe there's sprinkles of icing sugar on the top. So we've got some candidates there. Assuming you could extract ingredients from it, you could probably get butter icing out of the middle as butter icing. Maybe you could get chocolate off it or chips of chocolate out of it as chocolate. But you understand, you could only get the butter icing and the chocolate off this yummy chocolate cake because somebody put them in there and they are consistent with this thing being a chocolate cake and yummy. Did I mention chocolate cakes are yummy? Did I? Oh, yeah, okay, no problem. Chocolate cakes are yummy. So we've got this chocolate cake sitting there and it's got chocolate cake ingredients in it. And you could get, under the right circumstances, you could get chocolate cake ingredients out of it. Now, imagine this, you reach into the chocolate cake and you come up with a forkful of liver. Yeah. I think I've just disgusted myself, actually. I like liver, but not in chocolate cakes. Something has gone horribly wrong here. It's not habitual or normal to put liver in a chocolate cake. You would not expect to get liver out of a chocolate cake. It could just be the description. It could be the label. It could be the metaphor. It could be the model. Maybe it was inaccurately described. If we had called it a yummy chocolate and liver cake, then everything would be all right. You would expect to get liver out of a chocolate and liver cake. But if you get liver out of a chocolate cake, there is something gone wrong here. Once again, somebody has either unconsciously reached for the butter icing and got liver, a pretty sorry state of affairs if that's happened, or they've maliciously gone, we'll fix him, we'll put liver in his chocolate cake. So there's either been an unconscious or a malicious act if you get liver out of your chocolate cake. But you can only get liver out of your chocolate cake, or whatever you want to call the cake, if somebody has put liver in it in the first place. It cannot spontaneously manifest liver where there wasn't. your wife or your mother or whoever it was, or the baker in Tesco's did not limit themselves to flour and butter and eggs and sugar and chocolate and icing sugar. And then magically, out of a case of spontaneous creation, liver appeared in it, unbidden by anybody. Liver can only be in your chocolate cake because somebody, somewhere, something conceived the action of adding liver to that being, which now might be better described as a liver and chocolate cake. Once again, I'm hammering this to death for a very good reason, and that is vital to our understanding of existence and life. You can only get out of something that which is in it. Okay? If it is not in it, you can't get it out of it. Why would we be talking about salt and pepper and yummy chocolate and liver cakes in the first place? What on earth could be the point that I'm trying to torture to death here? Because of course it isn't about salt and pepper. It isn't about liver or chocolate cakes. The metaphor is meaning to hammer home this idea, which I will repeat shamelessly one more time. You cannot get out of something that which is not already in it and was put in it, whether deliberately and consciously as an act of service, whether unconsciously and unaware, or maliciously. There may be others, but they will cover everything that I can think of in this video anyway. And that, how does that apply to your life? Well, you express behaviors. Your personality, my personality, the personality of everybody you meet, your parents, your siblings, your significant other, your children, your boss, your colleagues, your underlings, the people you meet in the street, the checkout operator at Tesco's. Our personalities are made up of behaviors. Behaviors are expressions of what is within. You can only express what is within if that thing is within you and somehow it got in there. Go back to when you were 1 week old, or I was 1 week old. That's a long time ago, trust me. Or anybody you know was 1 week old. What was their personality? You can see what I mean. A 1-year-old baby. If it's your baby, you love it to death and you will anthropomorphize it to death, and you will do all sorts of wonderful things about it. It's easier if you think about somebody's baby that you don't have oxytocin floating around your body when you think about it and you look at it. It's got no personality because it doesn't do anything. Personality is a behavior. Personality is an act. If you want to think of it as an adult, imagine an adult in a coma. What personality has an adult in a coma got? Well, you can clearly see that an adult in a coma doesn't have a personality because it can't express anything. There may be or may not be things inside it, but it can't express them. So you could not have any measure of its personality. So, for example, somebody could be described as mercurial, quick to act, quick to anger, sort of blazing, these wonderful bursts of, emotional, angry outbursts. And we're going to call them mercurial. But you can see these are actions. You can only outburst anger by acting, and you are expressing that which is within you, anger. And that is the whole point of this salt and pepper video. If you are angry, if you express anger, you contain anger, and somehow the anger got in there. Got it? For you to express anger, or for your mother to express anger, or your boss or your underling or your sister to express anger, they have to have anger in them, and somehow that anger got in there. Because it's probably not the case that they were an angry fetus. I'm guessing that fetuses aren't generally angry, and somewhere along the line, things have happened that has resulted in anger being within them. When you were 1 week old, or I was 1 week old, it's very unlikely that we were angry. It's possible, but very unlikely. Things transpired in the nature and nurture cycle, that our nature is probably not anger. Our nurture produced anger. Okay. And I'll go into this in greater detail in another video, because this is simply about you must have it within you to express it. But I do want to emphasize the point that anger is not innate to you. It got in there. Anger, as an illustration, is generally an expression of powerlessness. When you feel that you cannot do something, or you are restrained from something, or you are unable to do something, the first stage might be helplessness. But at some point, you might establish yourself to go, bugger this, I am going to do something. And it explodes out of you. And that is anger. It's a motivating power. It's like a voltage that says, bugger this helplessness. I am going to perform, rightly or wrongly, badly, whatever, but I'll do something. I'm not just sitting here in a pool of my own piss. Okay? And that's what anger is. So that's why I say that it's not innate. A baby might be helpless in adult terms. A baby can't open a bank account, it can't drive a car. Let's face it, it can't suck its thumb accurately. A baby, a 1 week old baby, doesn't even know about sucking its thumb. It might accidentally stick its thumb in its eye at some point, but it wasn't a deliberate, conscious act. It may stick its thumb in its eye and wail because it hurts. But it's not because it failed to suck its thumb. It's simply because it hurts and it expressed it. The baby doesn't in any way ever feel inadequate, because it has zero concept of what is it possible to do. So it can't fail to do anything because it doesn't know it can do anything. It doesn't know what doing is. A 1 week old baby is 100% being. And as a being, it is not angry because it is not helpless. It is in that state of learning called unconscious incompetence. It doesn't even know what it can't do. So it can't be upset at not being able to do it. That's the next stage, when you know there are things that you can do and you can't do them. The baby's not at that stage. So babies are not inherently angry. And that's the point we're laboring about this. For there to be anger in you, anger had to arrive in you somehow. Somebody had to put that anger in you. And we're going to talk about that, because who put the anger in you, how it came to be there, is very interesting and is the subject of another very important lesson. But for now, let's recap what we've learned so far. In the video about metaphor, we learned that everything, including this video, is an inaccurate and incomplete description of what is. Okay? And we've learned that if you can get something out of something, it had to be there in the first place, and there has to be a mechanism of it getting in there in the first place. And it's either going to be benign and conscious, or it's going to be unconscious, or it's going to be malicious. Those are the only real choices that you've got about how something came to be in something in the first place: by design, by accident, or by malice. Okay? So we're not going to go into the moment why that you've got anger in you, or how it came to be there, or who's responsible for it. Yeah, we'll come to that later. But I want to go back for the time being to the salt and pepper metaphor, because actually I've just said we'll talk about responsibility some other time, but no, damn it, we're going to do it right now. Imagine that you are in your own home, and you go to lift the salt to put some salt on your chips. Yeah, because you love the taste of salt on your chips and there's no salt. Now, you could get up and you could refill the salt cellar and you could satisfy your own desire for salt yourself. And then you could use the salt cellar to put salt in your chips. Yeah, probably the most likely course of action. Another way to fulfill your desire for salt on your chips when there is none in the salt cellar would be to say, sweetheart, there's no salt. Just do us a favour, put some salt in, will you? And she says, yes, dear. I'm going to get some comments about that one, aren't I? And your charming other goes off and fills the salt cellar for you, and thereby you fulfill your desire. Similarly, you know, it could be your child. You could say, Becky, do a favour for daddy and fill the salt cellar, will you, love? Okay. Or maybe you're in a restaurant and put some salt on your chips and there isn't any, and you go, waiter, there's no salt, fill this, would you? Ooh, that was quite commanding. And the waiter goes off and he puts some salt in the salt cellar and he brings it back, and once again you satisfy your desire for salt on your chips by having asked somebody else to do it. Now, the reason I said responsibility was when you refilled the salt cellar yourself so that it was salt went in it such that we were able to get salt out of it, who was responsible for putting the salt in the salt cellar? Well, you were. That's obvious, isn't it? It's quite obvious that you took the little plasticky rubbery bit off the bottom, you put the salt in it, you put the little plasticky rubbery bit back in the bottom, and now it was full of salt, and you were able to go forth and satisfy your desire for salt on your chips. When you asked somebody else to do it, whether it was your charming other or your daughter or in the restaurant the waiter, who was responsible for the act of putting salt in the salt cellar? Well, once again, it seems fairly obvious in this metaphor that they are. If your wife put salt in the salt cellar, she is responsible for having put salt in the cellar. I'm not talking about should she have done it so that there was salt already. That's not what I mean by responsibility. I mean, she was the one who took the little plasticky rubber thing off the bottom. She was the one who poured salt out of the sort of like the salt warehouse and then put the little plasticky rubbery thing back on it and handed it back to you. She was responsible for her action of filling the salt cellar. Same as your daughter. When Becky went off and she filled the salt cellar for daddy, she was responsible for taking the little rubbery plasticky thing off the bottom, filling it with salt, putting the little plasticky rubbery thing on the bottom and handing it back to you. And same for the waiter. People are responsible for their own actions. Okay? So that really is very important, and I may well have strayed into something that I would have better kept for another video, but I can always repeat it so I don't blame myself. So to recap, you can only get something out of something if it's A, in there already, and B, it got in there by an act of deliberate creation, an unconscious act, or an act of malice. Yeah. Those are the only ways that you can get something out of anything, including anger or other reactions or other behaviors or other expressions of personality out of you or anybody you know. Here endeth the lesson.